Take off your shirt. If you're clean, what are you hiding? The cold voice echoed across the training yard as Claire stood surrounded by skeptical eyes. An officer yanked her faded hoodie with contempt. This thing would make a floor dirtier, not cleaner. But as the fabric lifted, 3 deep twisting scars were revealed across Claire's back, the unmistakable emblem of a 3-headed serpent. The field fell dead silent. And then, General Marcus Lorne appeared, caught sight of the scars, and dropped to one knee. Serpent 03 is still alive. Claire stood there, hoodie half lifted, her face calm, but her eyes like steel. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Soldiers shuffled unsure, their boots scraping the dirt. A few whispered, glancing at each other, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. The officer who'd yanked her hoodie, Lieutenant Garcia, stood frozen, his hand still outstretched like he'd touched something he shouldn't have. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Claire didn't flinch, didn't cover herself. She just let the moment sit, let the weight of it settle over the crowd like dust after an explosion. Hey, before we go further, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep these stories alive, to share what really happened to people like Claire. Just a quick tap, it's a small way to walk with us through this journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and truth. All right, let's keep going. The morning had started simple enough. Claire showed up at the base just after dawn, her canvas sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust on the gravel path. She carried a plain black backpack, the kind you'd see on a college kid, not a soldier. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, strands falling out framing her face. No makeup, no jewelry, just a faded gray hoodie and joggers that looked like they'd seen better days. The guards at the gate barely glanced at her ID before waving her through, assuming she was just another civilian volunteer. That's how it always started, people looking right through her, seeing what they wanted to see. As Claire crossed the yard, a group of maintenance workers unloading crates from a truck stopped to stare. One of them, a stocky guy with a stained cap and a smirk, called out, "Hey, sweetheart, you here to clean the barracks?" "They're that way." His buddies laughed, one slapping the crate like it was the punchline. Claire didn't stop walking. She adjusted her backpack strap, her fingers deliberate, and kept her eyes forward. The stocky guy's grin faltered when she didn't react, but he doubled down. "What too good to talk to us?" "Keep walking, princess." Claire paused just for a second and turned her head slightly. "I'm not here for your barracks," she said, her voice low but clear. The workers froze, their laughter cut short as if her words had sliced through the air. She'd been assigned to the base as a technical volunteer, whatever that meant. The paperwork was vague, just a temporary slip with her name, Claire Evans, and a barcode that didn't scan right. The desk sergeant had squinted at it, muttered something about new system glitches, and handed it back. Claire didn't argue. She just nodded and walked toward the training grounds where the morning formation was already underway. Rows of soldiers stood sharp in their pressed uniforms, sunlight glinting off polished boots. Claire didn't belong in that picture, and everyone noticed. Lieutenant Garcia was the first to call her out. He was mid-30s, broad-shouldered with a jaw that looked like it was carved to intimidate. His uniform was crisp, his voice sharper. "You think you're military?" "That hoodie wouldn't pass as a mop rag," he barked, stepping closer. A few recruits snickered their eyes, darting between Claire and the lieutenant. One of them, a wiry kid with a buzz cut, leaned to his buddy and muttered, "Did the lunch lady get lost or something?" The laughter spread quick and cruel like wildfire in dry grass. Claire didn't react. She reached into her backpack, pulled out the assignment slip, and held it out. Garcia snatched it, scanned it for half a second, then tore it in half. "Cheap counterfeit," he said, tossing the pieces to the ground. "Who authorized you into a combat zone? Where's your uniform?" The crowd tightened around her, curious, judgmental. A female officer, Captain Reynolds, shifted uncomfortably, her brow furrowing. She was older, maybe 40, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense braid. "Sir, maybe we should verify her ID first," she said. but Garcia waved her off. She's not one of us. Take off that hoodie. We need to check for hidden mics or transmitters. In the crowd, a young female recruit, barely 20, with a nervous habit of twisting her ring, whispered to the soldier next to her, "This ain't right." She's just standing there. But her friend, a taller girl with a tight ponytail, hissed back, "If she's legit, why's she dressed like that?" "She's asking for it." Claire's hands stayed steady as she clasped them behind her back, her posture snapping into a regulation stance so precise it made the recruit's own formation look sloppy. The nervous recruit's eyes widened, and she stopped twisting her ring. "That's not normal," she muttered, but nobody heard her over Garcia's next shout. Claire's voice came through soft but piercing. "If you need to inspect me, I won't resist. But don't feel too sure of yourselves until you've seen my back." Garcia laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "Take it off. Right here. Right now." The crowd shifted, some soldiers looking away, others leaning in. Captain Reynolds stepped forward again, her voice low but firm. "This feels excessive, sir, or indane de sipur." Garcia rounded on her. "Anyone who interferes will be disciplined." Reynolds froze her jaw tight, but she stepped back. Claire didn't argue. She turned, slowly facing away from the crowd, and lifted her hoodie halfway up her back. The fabric caught for a moment, then slid up, revealing pale skin crisscrossed by 3 jagged scars. They weren't random. They twisted together, forming the shape of 3 serpents, their heads meeting in the center of her spine. The sight was like a bomb going off, silent but devastating. A medic in the back, a lanky guy with glasses and a clipboard, dropped his pen. It rolled across the dirt unnoticed. He'd seen scars before, burns, shrapnel knife wounds, but nothing like this. His hands shook as he bent to pick up the pen, his eyes still locked on Claire's back. The wiry recruit who'd been laughing earlier took a step back, his face pale. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Garcia's hand hovered, his sneer gone, replaced by something uneasy. Claire stood still, her breathing even letting the crowd absorb what they'd seen. The silence was so thick it felt like the world had stopped turning. The laughter stopped. The whispers stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A soldier in the back, an older guy with gray at his temples, dropped his clipboard. It hit the ground with a dull thud. Nobody moved to pick it up. Garcia's face went slack, his hand still hovering where he'd yanked her hoodie. Claire stood there, letting them look, her breathing steady, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Then from the edge of the field came the sound of boots on gravel, slow, deliberate. General Marcus Lorne, the base commander, was crossing the yard, his aide trailing behind. He was in his 50s, weathered with a face that carried too many secrets. He stopped dead when he saw Claire's back. Lorne's steps slowed like he was walking through water. His aide, a young major with a tablet under his arm, nearly bumped into him. "Sir?" the major asked, but Lorne didn't answer. He just stared at the scars, his face paling. Then he whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "The mark of Shadow Serpent. The legendary unit erased a decade ago." He took a step closer, his voice shaking. "Everyone kneel." The command cracked through the air like a whip. Soldiers flinched, confused, but one by one they dropped to their knees. Even the wiry recruit who'd been laughing minutes ago sank down, his eyes wide. Garcia didn't move. "Sir, she's a suspected imposter." He protested, his voice loud but unsteady. A few soldiers muttered in agreement, glancing at Claire like she'd tricked them somehow. "Sir, is there some mistake?" One asked a tall guy with a fresh shave and nervous hands. Lorne didn't look at them. He stepped closer to Claire, his eyes locked on hers. "Your name?" he asked quietly. She lowered her hoodie, turned to face him, and answered Evans. "Claire, ID code Serpent03. Sole survivor of Raven Station." The words were simple, but they hit like a grenade. Lorne's face went ashen. He dropped to one knee, his head bowed. "She's no imposter," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. she is a living legend. As Lorne knelt, a maintenance worker from earlier, the one in the stained cap, lingered at the edge of the crowd. He'd followed the commotion curious, but now his smirk was gone. He clutched a wrench in his hand, his knuckles white, and muttered to himself, "No way. No way she's that Evans." His buddy, still holding a crate, nudged him hard. "Shut up, man. You saw the scars. You heard the general." The worker shook his head, stepping back into the shadows of the supply truck, but his eyes stayed on Claire like he was trying to unsee what he'd just witnessed. Claire didn't notice him. She adjusted her hoodie, her movements slow and deliberate, and turned to face the crowd again. The field was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, now thick with awe, fear, maybe guilt. The older soldier, the one who'd dropped his clipboard, had tears in his eyes. Shadow Serpent was said to be a myth, he said, his voice breaking. But I remember that voice. From the hostage rescue op years ago. Claire didn't acknowledge him. She adjusted her hoodie, smoothed it down, and said, "I don't need you to believe me. I just came to retrieve something I left in the storage bunker 7 years ago." Lorne's voice trembled as he stood. You're still alive." Claire's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. "I was never allowed to die." Later that morning, as Claire walked toward the mess hall to grab water, a group of off-duty soldiers lingered near the entrance. One of them, a beefy guy with a crew cut and a loud laugh, spotted her and nudged his friends. "Yo, it's the hoodie girl. Bet she's here to scrub dishes." His voice carried drawing stares. He stepped closer, holding a tray of half-eaten food, and tilted it toward her. "Want some leftovers? Volunteer? Looks like you could use a meal." Claire stopped, her hand tightening briefly on her backpack strap. She looked at him, her gaze steady, and said, "You should finish what's on your plate. Waste isn't a good look." The guy's laugh died, his tray dipping slightly as his friends shifted, uncomfortably unsure whether to laugh or back off. A young officer, a cocky guy with slicked back hair and a captain's bar, couldn't hold back. "If you're truly Serpent 03, then why disappear?" he shouted, stepping forward. "Why no rank? No medal? Why let us shame you like this?" The crowd stirred, some nodding, others looking away. Claire's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. "When my unit died, my record was burned with them," she said. "I was erased. I wasn't allowed to exist. But I came back because someone among you is betraying the command. And I'm here to end it, just like I did 7 years ago." Her words were calm, but they carried a weight that made the air feel colder. In the mess hall, a cook behind the counter watched Claire as she filled a water bottle. He was older, with a limp and a faded tattoo on his forearm, and he leaned forward, squinting. "You're her, aren't you?" he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Claire glanced at him, her expression neutral. "Her who?" she asked, screwing the cap on her bottle. The cook shook his head, a small smile breaking through. "I was at Raven Station. Supply crew. Heard your voice over the radio before it all went to hell." Claire paused, her fingers lingering on the bottle. "You got out," she said quietly. The cook nodded, his eyes distant. "Yeah, because of you." She didn't respond, just gave a small nod and walked away, leaving him staring after her. Garcia's face twisted like he was trying to laugh, but couldn't. "Betraying the command? You're just a volunteer." He spat. But his voice cracked, and he took a step back when Claire turned to look at him. Her eyes weren't angry, they were worse. They were steady, like she could see right through him. Lorne raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "Enough," he said. He turned to Claire, his voice low. "Come with me. He led her toward the secure security office, his aides scrambling to keep up. The soldiers stayed where they were, some still kneeling, others standing but too stunned to move. As they crossed the base, a young clerk in the admin building saw Claire pass by the window. She was barely 22, with glasses and a nervous habit of chewing her pen. She'd overheard the rumors about the scars about Shadow Serpent, and now she fumbled with a stack of papers, dropping half of them. One sheet slid across the floor, a faded memo with a redacted name. The clerk's hands shook as she picked it up, her eyes darting to Claire outside. "That's her," she whispered to herself, recognizing the ID code from a classified file she'd processed weeks ago. She stuffed the memo into a drawer, her heart racing, knowing she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. Inside the office, the air was stale heavy with the smell of old coffee and paper. Lorne shut the door, his hands shaking slightly as he turned to a console on the wall. "Three-headed serpent awaken," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A screen flickered to life and a restricted system unlocked, Shadow Serpent Class Omega. Claire's image appeared 10 years younger, her face sharper, her eyes brighter, standing beside 5 other agents. The note below read, "Sole Survivor. Authorized to erase, summon, execute any target if reactivated. Scar emblem serves as living identification." Lorne stared at the screen, then at Claire. "It's really you," he said almost to himself. Claire didn't respond. She stood by the desk, her hands in her pockets, her posture relaxed but alert. The aide, Major Carter, was flipping through files on his tablet, his fingers moving too fast like he was trying to keep up with his own thoughts. This can't be right," he muttered. Shadow Serpent was decommissioned after Raven Station. The explosion, he trailed off, looking at Claire like she was a ghost. She didn't flinch. "I was there," she said simply. "I walked out." Lorne leaned against the desk, his knuckles white. "And the scars?" he asked. Claire's voice was flat. "A gift from the enemy. A reminder I wasn't supposed to survive." Outside, a group of recruits gathered near the training grounds, whispering about what they'd seen. One of them, a short guy with a nervous laugh, pulled out his phone to record a quick video. "Yo, you won't believe what just happened," he started, but before he could finish, an older sergeant snatched the phone from his hand. "You think this is a game?" The sergeant growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't record her." "Not her." The recruit stammered, trying to argue, but the sergeant deleted the video and tossed the phone back. "You didn't see nothing," he said, walking away. The recruit stood there, his hands shaking, realizing he'd crossed a line he didn't understand. The mood on the training grounds had shifted. Soldiers were whispering passing rumors like contraband. The wiry recruit was pale, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I heard Shadow Serpent took out an entire enemy compound alone," he said to his friend, who just shook his head. Captain Reynolds stood apart, her arms crossed, staring at the ground. She had tried to stop the humiliation, and now she looked like she was replaying it in her head, wondering what she could have done differently. Garcia was pacing, his face red, muttering to anyone who'd listen. "She's lying. She has to be." But nobody was listening anymore. Claire's mission wasn't supposed to involve the training grounds. She'd come for the storage bunker, a concrete vault buried at the edge of the base. 7 years ago, she'd hidden something there, a drive with names, dates, and coordinates. Evidence of a leak that had cost her team their lives. She'd been reactivated 3 days ago with a cryptic message from an old contact. "It's happening again. Find it." She didn't trust anyone, not even Lorne. But she needed access, and that meant walking through the base, through the stairs, through the judgment. She'd known it would be like this. It always was. As Claire approached the bunker, a security guard stationed nearby, a burly man with a shaved head and a skeptical squint, blocked her path. "This area is restricted," he said, crossing his arms. "Volunteers don't get in here." Claire didn't argue. She pulled a small keycard from her pocket, its surface worn, but marked with a faint serpent emblem. The guard's eyes narrowed, then widened as he recognized the symbol. He stepped aside, his hand dropping to his sidearm, not in threat, but in uncertainty. "Go ahead," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Claire nodded and moved past him, her steps steady, as if she had walked through 100 guarded doors before. Back in the office, Lorne was still processing. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. Claire tilted her head just slightly. "Would you have believed me?" she asked. Lorne didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was in the way he had frozen when he saw her scars, the way his voice had shaken. Major Carter cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "We'll need to verify this with command," he said, but Lorne cut him off. "No. She's verified. That mark, only national-level commanders know it. And those who've seen it," he paused, swallowing hard, "they know to kneel." The bunker was cold damp, the air thick with the smell of rust. Claire knelt by a locked panel, her fingers moving quickly, expertly, as she entered a code. The lock clicked, and she pulled out a small metal box no bigger than a pack of cards. Inside was a single drive, its surface scratched but intact. She slipped it into her pocket without a word. Lorne watched his hands clasped behind his back. "What's on it?" he asked. Claire stood brushing dirt off her knees. "Names," she said. "People who shouldn't be here." Lorne's face tightened, but he didn't press her. He knew better. As they left the bunker, a young soldier cleaning his rifle nearby glanced up and froze. His hands fumbled, the rifle clattering to the ground. He'd been at the formation, seen the scars, heard the whispers. Now seeing Claire up close, he scrambled to pick up the rifle, his face red. "Ma'am, I didn't mean," he stammered, but Claire just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Clean your weapon properly," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You'll need it." The soldier nodded, his hands shaking as he went back to work, but his eyes followed her until she was out of sight, like he'd just seen a legend come to life. By noon, the base was buzzing. Garcia had been called to a closed-door meeting with Lorne and 2 other officers. He didn't come out for hours. When he did, his face was gray, his uniform slightly wrinkled like he'd been sitting too long. Word got around fast. He'd been relieved of duty, effective immediately. Nobody knew exactly why, but the whispers pointed to Claire's drive, to names that matched records in the system. The wiry recruit was quieter now, sticking to the back of formations, his jokes gone. The tall soldier who'd questioned Lorne was seen deleting posts from his social media, his hands shaking as he scrolled. That afternoon, a group of officers gathered in the command center, their voices low but tense. One of them, a major with a sharp suit and a habit of checking his watch, pulled up a file on his laptop. "This doesn't add up," he said, pointing at Claire's name on a roster. "She's listed as a volunteer, but her clearance code, it's higher than mine." Another officer, a woman with short hair and a skeptical frown, leaned over. "Then why is she walking around like a nobody?" The major shook his head, closing the laptop. "Maybe she wants us to think that..." They exchanged glances, the room quiet as if Claire's presence had left a shadow they couldn't shake. Captain Reynolds approached Claire later that day just outside the mess hall. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the yard. "I should have done more," Reynolds said, her voice low. "Back there I should have stopped it." Claire looked at her, her eyes softening for the first time. "You tried," she said. "That's more than most." Reynolds nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She walked away, her braids swinging slightly, her shoulders heavy with something unspoken. That evening, Claire's husband arrived. He didn't announce himself, didn't need to. He stepped out of a black SUV, his frame tall and lean, his face unreadable. He was in his early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that didn't miss a thing. The soldiers nearby froze their conversations, dying mid-sentence. He wasn't in uniform, just a plain jacket and jeans, but the way he moved, calm, deliberate, made the air shift. Garcia, who'd been lingering near the gate, looked away, his hands stuffed in his pockets. The wiry recruit ducked behind a truck. Even Captain Reynolds paused, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Before he reached Claire, a young lieutenant eager to prove himself stepped into his path. "Sir, this is a restricted area," he said, his voice bold, but his hands fidgeting. Claire's husband didn't stop, didn't even look at him. He just kept walking, his presence like a wave pushing the lieutenant aside. The young officer opened his mouth to protest, then caught Claire's eye. She gave a small shake of her head and he stepped back, his confidence crumbling. The other soldiers watched silent as the man reached Claire and touched her arm, a gesture so small it said everything. He walked straight to Claire, who was standing by the flagpole, her backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't say much, just touched her arm, a small gesture that said everything. The soldiers watched, some whispering, others silent. Nobody needed to say his name. His presence was enough. Claire didn't smile, didn't lean into him. She just nodded and they walked to the SUV together. The door closed with a soft thud, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving the base quieter than it had been all day. In the days that followed, the consequences rolled out like ripples on water. Garcia's name vanished from the duty roster. A news article surfaced online, vague but damning, about an officer removed for conduct unbecoming. The wiry recruit lost his sponsorship for an elite training program. Nobody said why, but his social media went silent. The tall soldier was reassigned to a desk job, his dreams of field command quietly shelved. None of it was loud, none of it was dramatic. Just reality catching up. Claire didn't come back to the base. The drive she'd retrieved was handed off to someone higher up, someone whose name never made it to the reports. The betrayal she'd mentioned was real names on that drive led to arrests, quiet ones, the kind that don't make headlines. She didn't gloat, didn't send a message to rub it in. She just kept moving, like she always had. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was power. The kind that didn't need words. The soldiers who'd knelt that day didn't forget her. Neither did the ones who'd laughed. They carried it with them, a story they'd tell in low voices years later when the base was just a memory. Claire Evans, the woman in the faded hoodie, who walked through their judgment and came out the other side. She didn't need their respect. She didn't need their apologies. She'd been through worse, and she'd survived. Her scars said that much. Sometimes late at night when the world feels heavy and unfair, you can almost see her. Standing there, eyes calm, hands steady, letting the world underestimate her. You know what that feels like, don't you? To be judged, dismissed, pushed aside. But you're still here. You're still standing. And so was she. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.